Welcome to Connecting the Dots, a laser-focused, quick-fire interview on food and the economy with international experts, where we seek answers to questions all of us should be asking. I'm Ajay Jakhar, Chairman Bharat Krishik Samaj of Farmers Forum India, as well as the Vice Chair of Action Track 2, Shift to Sustainable Consumption Patterns at the UN Food System Summit. Today, I'm delighted to introduce Ruth Richardson, the Chair of the UN Food System Summit Champions Network. Ruth is also the Executive Director of the Global Alliance for the Future of Food, a coalition of foundations committed to transform food and agriculture systems. Thank you, Ruth, for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm so pleased to be in conversation with you again.
Thank you.
Thanks for the invite.
You have been working in the space of environment, agriculture, and food systems for 25 years. Can you tell us a bit about your journey and how you became so interested in these areas and also influential?
So Ajay, I've always worked in the field of philanthropy, including corporate foundations, public and private foundations, community foundations. I've worked at the local level, the regional level, national level, global level. And I've mostly worked on issues related to conservation, to land preservation, human health, indigenous rights. And only in hindsight did I see that the common thread through all of this work has been food systems. Food systems touches all these critical areas. And I realized that that was at the center of all my work. How did I become interested in these areas? Well, my degree is in environmental studies. So that has always been a really strong interest of mine. Ecology, systems, our relationship with the natural world, that probably stems from a childhood spent in the Canadian wilderness. As well, my grandparents were farmers and I spent a lot of time on that farm. So the food-nature connection has never really been very far away from me.
That's really nice, because what you're doing is really amazingly very good. Recently, Global Alliance released 2 resources relating to 7 principles and calls for action to guide interventions around food systems. What kinds of food system actors are these resources meant for, and how do you see them being used in the near future?
Yes, thank you for that question. These are 2 very important products that we've just released. And essentially what I would say is that food systems change requires engagement between all actors, sometimes uncomfortable engagement between the private sector, policymakers, indigenous peoples, civil society organizations, farmers, philanthropy. How can we change the system if we don't understand one another's perspectives, find common ground, or figure out kind of where we can agree, and then move towards some sort of common goals? So these resources are meant for people who want change, who understand the connections between food systems and the current crisis we face, like climate change, increasing hunger, public health, migration. Also for people who understand the need for radical transformation. They're guides, these products are guides to help us navigate that territory together. They kind of give us common tools with which to work. They're not the only tools. Many people have many tools, but they're a contribution to the field based on what we at the Global Alliance have learned from 8 or 9 years of working on these issues collaboratively with so many others. So I would like them used in 2 ways. First, I would like to see principles for food systems adopted by the UN Food System Summit. They don't necessarily have to be the Global Alliance's principles, but I believe that principles generally are one of the most powerful tools that we have, and a tool that actually has often been adopted by the United Nations. So I would really like to see a set of food system principles adopted at the highest level as they relate to what our future of food looks like. Secondly, I would really like to find synergies in our calls to action with others who are of like mind. So for instance, agroecology, true cost accounting, good governance, healthy diets. These are our calls to action. And we feel that there are great synergies with others that may have similar calls to action, where we can align forces and really try to advance these imperatives for food systems transformation.
That's important. And I believe that food systems has already achieved a narrative change in the world, that now everyone is talking about food systems. You were a pioneer, but now everyone is talking about this. And this has been a great achievement of the UN Food Systems Summit. What has been the role of the Champions Network in the larger summit process, and your experiences as a key player in this summit?
Yes, thank you. The role of the champions is threefold. Essentially, our terms of reference outlines sort of three main responsibilities for the champions. Number one is to participate in the main structures of the summit. So the science group, the action tracks, that has happened. Our champions have been very much engaged in all of those structures and processes. The second responsibility is to act as a sounding board for some of the early recommendations, solutions, conclusions. That has also happened. We have consistently invited leads of these processes to come and present to the champions, and the champions have been able to provide feedback to say, this is really important, or maybe we're missing this, or have you thought about that? So also a very important role. The third responsibility for the champions is really to mobilize around priority solutions. To be honest, we haven't moved as quickly on that as we have wanted to, just because we haven't been sure what the framework is. So we've had solution clusters, we've had action areas. We're now moving into a process of identifying coalitions. So essentially, we're just waiting for sort of the summit leadership to indicate kind of what they want us to mobilize around. Once we have that sense and that clarity, then we will work to mobilize champions around those solutions. So, we're sort of poised to dive into that. I think this is an incredibly important part of the whole process. And I think in terms of, your question around experience as a key player, I would just share your perspective that now everybody's talking about food systems. There's certain narrative shifts that have happened. There's certain things that people are now aware of that are, really, really important. So as an example, on one of the leadership team meetings, or what we call the integrating team meetings, David Nabarro very astutely said, on the governance side, people now recognize that food systems need to be governed. So that's a really important conclusion for people to come to. Our food systems need to be governed. Now is the hard work to figure out how and to what end. So, our work is not done. Even after the summit, our work is just starting. But these sorts of awareness building exercises are just so critically important. And so I'm encouraged by the amount of attention the summit is getting, and some of the conclusions that people are already drawing in their minds.
Yes, that's encouraging. You have worked in the corporate sector and in the world of philanthropy. The question is, do you think it is possible for the food industry to opt for voluntary commitments regarding sustainability and equitability, or are enforceable regulations required on part of national governments on a global scale, such as the recent corporate tax reform by the G7?
Ajay, I think it's going to take all of it. We're in a crisis on a planetary scale that has never been seen before. The world is literally burning. Hunger levels are skyrocketing. The rates of malnutrition, including diabetes, obesity, are crushing national governments. And a highly industrialized food system is to blame, not for all of it, but for a significant proportion of it. We built this system, and we need quickly to deconstruct it and build it again, not for profit necessarily or short-term gain, but for, as you say in your question, sustainability and equity and other more important values. So the food industry needs to opt for voluntary commitments where appropriate, and laws and regulations are also required where appropriate. And that may sound like I'm kind of dodging the answer, but I'm not. I think that the change and the scope and scale necessary to address these crises will require all the tools we have in the toolbox. And I don't think we should shy away from things like regulation. Oftentimes, they need sharper tools to incite the kind of transformation that we need, alongside all sorts of other tools, like voluntary measures and narrative change and public engagement. But it's going to require all of that, and quickly.
That's a very good answer, and which gets us to the second issue. Is you wrote a blog on solving problems versus problem solvers. Let me repeat that. You wrote a blog on solving problems versus problem solving, which showed how systems thinking looks at not just specific problems and their interconnections, but also at the entire problem space and the dynamic systems within which these problems exist. However, often grant-making organizations prefer to fund initiatives that solve specific problems within a given time frame. If a systems approach was adopted by the funders, how would it change the way we understand the impact and the donor-NGO relationship?
Well, you've done your homework, and that's a great question.
We follow you, so we know.
Yeah, clearly. So that's great, and I appreciate that you've been following and reading. And thank you for the question. They say when you know one foundation, you know one foundation. They are all so distinct, and they're driven by their own cultures and policies and practices. If I ran a foundation, which I don't, but if I did, and I wanted to apply a systems approach, I think I would do three things. First of all, I would connect issues. Too often foundations work in silos. They have a climate program, they have a public health program, they have a biodiversity program, but we all know these issues are so intimately connected. So to be a systems thinker, to be a systems funder, I think what is required is to start to connect these issues and see them as one and the same and not as distinct programs. So that would be the first thing I would do. The second thing I would do was really think about the timeframes of funding. Systems change can happen very, very quickly, but more often than not, it's very slow because, of course, entrenched and established systems resist change. They don't want to change. And so I think what is required is sort of slow, patient money that allows the timeframes needed to really make the change that we need. And thirdly, I think what I would do is go for the highest leverage points. There's a woman named Danilo Meadows, who is one of my mentors. And I go to her often, to her writings, to learn. And she wrote a fantastic article called Dancing with Systems and Leverage Points for Systems Change. And she talks about the hierarchy of that. And so I think for higher leverage points, we want to go after some of the lock-ins, some of the things that keep us entrenched in these systems, like, our export orientation, like our expectation of cheap food, certain narratives that we carry, like we must feed the world, limited and narrow measures of success. So I think by sort of changing to a systems orientation, we can sort of get to the systemic nature of this, the interconnected nature of it. We can think about the timeframes, and then we can really go after some of these lock-ins that need to change in order for us to break through that resistance to change.
When we come to the last question, in spite of past food systems and UN declarations, so many of them, the number of hungry and obese in the world have increased in numbers, and most of the hungry are farmers today. How frustrating is the dominating role of power structures inhibiting a food systems transformation?
So just back to my previous answer, there's great resistance to change, especially from those that benefit from the current system. There are many with vested interests, and that's part of the resistance to change and why we can't advance. I'm a hopeful person, Ajay, and it's my hope that we're able to break through that resistance, either from the vested interests recognizing the need, even if only for their own self-interests. I mean, look at the fires, the floods, the extreme heat. Companies, businesses, others, we're so dependent on our natural systems. And if we mess with those, we mess ultimately with our own well-being, with our own productivity, with our own success. So we need to break through that resistance, either from vested interests recognizing that they need to change. Otherwise, they're going to be, a chapter in the book of history saying you didn't make it. Or if not from their own recognition of that, then from pressure from the outside. We see more and more people standing up, whether it's farmer protests or groups like Extinction Rebellion or global leaders like Yvon Chouinard from Patagonia, who's revolutionizing what it means to be a profitable company while ascribing to deep ecological and human-centered values. Many people are starting to stand up and getting more vocal. So I think that's absolutely necessary. At the Global Alliance, our theory of transformation is that we will change things when we all start moving together towards generally commonly held goals, where we can build momentum and critical mass that will lead to a tipping point. So that's how we see change. And so, I think what is needed is movements growing, people becoming louder, more persuasive, more connected at all scales. Again, if I can reference Danella Meadows, she answered the question, how do you create change? And her answer was, you keep pointing at the anomalies and failures in the old paradigm. You keep speaking and acting loudly and with assurance from the new one. You insert people with the new paradigm in places of public visibility and power. You don't waste time with reactionaries. Rather, you work with active change agents and with the vast middle ground of people who are open-minded. I think that's a very powerful quote. So I would add, of course, that those change agents need to run the gamut of those who are smart strategists, good communicators, hold vested interest to account, have broad public outreach. We need a whole ecosystem of change agents. And I hope that's one of the successful outcomes of the summit, is that we've been able to create those networks. Through the summit, for instance, I've been able to get to know you. You've been able to get to know me. We understand where our agendas might align. That's powerful and important. So let's hold that up and let's keep building that momentum and those networks.
Thank you so much for your time. But I'm so encouraged by your last answer that I think I'm going to reach out to you for another interview, maybe in the months to come, because that's the heart of the issue, that we need to be active not only on the streets, on Facebook, stick, as in the corporate boardrooms, and we got to be active everywhere. Thank you, Ruth.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, and I'd love to join you again. So please be in touch. Thanks, Ajay.
Thank you so much for this interview.